Dr. Doom is the greatest villain ever created because this guy has done everything. He's displayed these acts of pettiness that are so incredible that it shows you how low this man is willing to stoop. But at the same time, he's been a multiversal conqueror. I mean, to give you a display of some of this pettiness that Dr. Doom has been engaged in, there was one point when he hired Luke Cage to track down Doombots that had gone rogue in New York City, and he was going to pay Luke Cage $200 to do it. Now, Luke Cage agrees, he finds the robots, and then Doom just ghosts him, stiffing him out of all this money. And this is the same Doom that's one of the richest men in the world. So Luke Cage gets a fantastic car, travels to Latveria, gives Dr. Doom the business, and if you can ever believe it or not, actually convinces Doom to hand the money over. It's a crazy situation. Another incredible act of pettiness that's also hilarious is right after the death of Johnny Storm. So in order to stop Annihilus, Johnny Storm had locked off a portal and stayed on the other side in the negative zone to essentially sacrifice himself in order to try to beat Annihilus's forces. Shortly after this, and with everybody believing that Johnny Storm's dead, Reed asked Dr. Doom to join the Fantastic Four without telling the Thing. So when Ben walks in and he sees Doom, he immediately becomes aggressive, like he's pissed off because he thinks Doom is, doing some villainous stuff. And Dr. Doom humbles this guy with one of the most vicious verbal attacks I've ever seen. He asks Ben if it's true that while Johnny Storm was valiantly sacrificing his life against the forces of Annihilus, if it was true that Ben Grimm, surrounded by crying children, simply just watched. How very brave. I mean, you have to be an incredibly petty dick to take this opportunity to twist the knife into somebody who was still mourning the death of their best friend. But in addition to these admittedly hilarious acts of pettiness, Doom has also showcased a capacity for incredibly nefarious stuff. For example, he was offered a deal by demons that would grant him incredible mystical power in exchange for something irreplaceable. So Doom willingly offers up the life of Valeria, a woman that he'd been deeply in love with for most of his life. Doom even goes to Valeria under the guise of renouncing science if she would agree to come back to him. And once she does agree, the demonic spell activates, killing her and flaying off her flesh. Doom then incorporates it into his armor. And later in that same story arc, Dr. Doom imprisons Franklin Richards in hell just to torture his rival Reed Richards. And I should mention here, this is not adult Franklin Richards. This is when Franklin was a kid. Dr. Doom sent a kid to hell just to mess with his rival, which is one of the most evil things that I've ever heard of a person doing. But sending Franklin to hell wasn't the only way that he tortured the Fantastic Four. There was also kind of a funny way that he did it. He actually stole their powers and then gave them back in a mismatched way, like making Susan Storm burn like the Human Torch, or making Johnny Storm stretch like Mr. Fantastic and then placing him in a torture device. And on top of all of that, he possesses the mind of Valeria Richards, who was named after the woman that he had killed earlier in the story, just to make things suck a little bit more for the Fantastic Four. And so Dr. Doom is capable of doing some incredibly diabolical things. But believe it or not, what makes him so compelling is that he's actually the hero in his own mind, because we can kind of see where he's coming from to an extent. That in his mind, he's the opposite. That Dr. Doom truly believes that he is uniquely qualified to save humanity from itself. That Dr. Doom envisions a world where everyone lives in a near paradise, free from most of the problems that plague mankind today. But of course, in order for people to live in such a condition, they have to live under his rule. But as strange as it may sound, Doom's motivations to rule the world are somewhat understandable when you consider his tragic origin story. Because before Dr. Doom became Dr. Doom, he was simply just Victor Von Doom, born in Latveria to a Romani healer named Warner Von Doom and his wife Cynthia. Now Cynthia, who was a sorceress with an affinity for dark magic, basically sought to end the persecution of her people at the hands of the Baron of Latveria. So to achieve this, Cynthia made a deal with the demon Mephisto, exchanging her soul for power to deal with the Baron. Now, as deals with demons tend to go, this deal backfired when Mephisto gave her the power that she agreed to, but not the ability to control that power, which resulted in the loss of innocent lives, specifically the lives of a lot of the children within the Romani village, which happened when Cynthia attacked the Baron and his men. And so Cynthia fled into the woods and then died from the wounds she sustained during her battle, leaving her young son Victor without any kind of a mother. And that's not the end of the tragedy. right? Because his father would take Victor and then flee into the wilderness out of fear that he was going to be killed after failing to heal the Baron's sick wife. And so while Doom and his dad were both found by a friend, almost frozen to death, his father would eventually die, leaving Victor by himself. And so the loss of both parents and the anger that he felt towards those responsible actually fueled Victor's quest to acquire as much power, both magically and politically, as he possibly could. And so not only would Victor devote himself to the study of magic like his mother had, he would also become a prolific student of science, which actually led him to Empire State University in the United States. And it was here that Doom was introduced to Reed Richards, which would ignite a rivalry between these two classmates that would actually carry well past college and remain a vital part of both of their journeys. Because during Doom's time in college, where he was quickly establishing himself as one of the best scientific minds in the world, this would only serve to add to the tragic origin of Doom. Because while he was still a student, Doom was working on a machine that would allow him to speak with the dead, which he intended to use to rescue his mother's soul from Mephisto. Reed Richards noticed that there were flaws in Doom's design, but due to his arrogance and disdain for Reed, Doom ignored these warnings. And so when the machine was turned on, it literally blew up in Doom's face, causing permanent disfigurement. Now, Doom was so ashamed of the way that he looked after the accident that he donned his signature mask. Now, Doom was also expelled from the university after conducting this dangerous, unauthorized experiment, which only made his hatred for Richards even more intense because he blamed Richards for him being expelled, convincing himself that Reed had done something to his machine. But this accident was a pivotal moment in Doom's character development, and honestly, it symbolized a change from Victor Von Doom to the arrogant and incredibly brilliant student into Dr. Doom, the villain who would become a mainstay of the Marvel Universe. Because after leaving the United States, Doom continues to study both science and magic, becoming a master of both. And his next ambition was to return to Latveria and overthrow the Baron's government, setting himself up as a monarch in its place. Now, Doom's prowess as a sorcerer and scientist allows him to achieve this goal, and he installs himself as the ruler of Latveria. But Doom's regime doesn't really look the way you would expect a government run by a power-hungry, iron-fisted supervillain dictator to look like. And the reason why I say that is because under Doom's rule, Latveria and its people prosper. Despite the fact that Doom does not allow dissent from his people, they live in a society that's free of hunger, poverty, and crime. Doom actually builds Latveria into one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, with all the trappings of a town that has been untouched by time. And so yeah, Dr. Doom is very much a great character. I mean, sure, he rules his people as a tyrant, believing that it's his destiny to do so, and that he's the only one capable of bringing this level of peace and prosperity to his people. But on the other hand, he's kind of right. If we're being honest, the fact that people cannot question his rule is somewhat irrelevant, because who would dissent from living in a near-perfect society? And even though he rules strictly, he does not govern cruelly, which just reinforces what a complex character he is. In fact, there's a fantastic moment when Dr. Doom is talking to Namor the Submariner in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers the New Avengers. And to paraphrase here, he asks the question, do you really believe that my walls are beyond being torn down? That if the people of Latveria truly wanted to destroy me, that they would not run me out of this country? And he says, but I keep them protected, I keep them fed. And so before they pray to whatever god they pray to when they go to sleep at night, they give thanks to me. Because Doom understands they choose to stay there. They choose him as their leader because for the most part, they love the life they have. And so to get a real sense of what motivates Doom, we can actually look at Doom War, which was a story written by Jonathan Mayberry in 2010. Now in that story, Dr. Doom had incited a nationalist uprising in the kingdom of Wakanda in order to create a lot of noise over here so nobody would understand what was going on over there. And what was going on over there is Dr. Doom was sneaking into the country with the intention of stealing their vibranium, which he believed would grant him unrivaled power. And in fact, it actually did. Now, Doom has to unlock a series of locks and then finally stand in judgment before Bast, the panther god of Wakanda, in order to prove himself worthy of taking the vibranium. And so Bast looks into Doom's soul and sees that although Doom's methods may be brutal, even leading to millions of deaths, his motivation is to save billions, to save humanity from itself. Because Doom's looked at all the possible futures, and the only one where mankind is no longer plagued by crime, hunger, and sickness is the one where Doom rules the world as an absolute godlike monarch. And in fact, we actually get to see what the world under Doom's control would look like in the 1987 Marvel graphic novel Emperor Doom by David Michelinie. In that story, story, Doom imprisons and harnesses the power of the Purple Man, Zebediah Killgrave, who has the ability to control the minds of others using pheromones. And so Doom uses this power on the entire global population. And just like he always said he could do, he wipes out all the bad stuff. There's no crime, no wars, no pollution, but there's also no free will, because everyone is just Doom's mind slave. And so ultimately we just see that Doom does really want a good future for humanity, but he doesn't believe that's possible without him being the only one in charge. And he's willing to do some pretty morally reprehensible stuff in order to make that happen. But because of the tension between Doom as a villain and Doom as a more severely flawed anti-hero, we've actually seen multiple stories published by Marvel that feature Doom as one of the primary protagonists, suggesting that even Marvel cannot definitively place Doom firmly into the villain camp. For example, take the 1989 graphic novel Doctor Strange Triumph and Torment by Roger Stern and Mike Mignola. This story gives us an intimate glimpse into Doom's humanity as he teams up with Doctor Strange to enter into Mephisto's realm and save his mother's soul. Now the setup here is that both Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange had been summoned by the Vishanti, a group of 3 magical deities in the Marvel Universe, to participate in a kind of competition of Earth's greatest magic users for the title of Sorcerer Supreme. Now Doctor Strange, of course, ultimately wins the title, but Doom puts on an impressive enough showing that the Vishanti tell Doctor Strange that he has to grant Doom a favor. And so Strange expects some kind of wish for more power, and is actually surprised to find that Doom's wish is for Strange's assistance in rescuing his mother's soul. Now we also find out that Doom has been attempting to do this on his own for years, but each time he confronts Mephisto, it ends in a stalemate or with Doom's defeat. And so as they work their way through Mephisto's realm, Doom and Strange work together surprisingly well, but the time comes when they have to confront Mephisto himself. And if you're familiar with Mephisto at all, you know that he's nearly omnipotent within his own realm. And as powerful as Doom is, he's just simply not able to match Mephisto and free his mom's soul, until Mephisto offers him a deal, that if Doom is willing to deliver Doctor Strange's soul to Mephisto, his mother's soul can be freed. Of course, Doom accepts this deal, and then Mephisto traps Doctor Strange in a power-dampening crystal before freeing Doom's mother's soul and then restoring her body. And so Doom has finally obtained what he's wanted more than anything in the world: the freedom of his mother and an end to her torture at the hands of Mephisto. But his joy almost immediately evaporates, because once his mother learns that Doom had bargained her soul with the soul of another, she disowns him and then turns to stone. The cool thing about this is that Strange breaks free of Mephisto's trap using a device that Doom had hidden for him, which revealed that the betrayal of Strange was a deception that Mephisto fell for. That Strange then frees Doom's mother's soul from her statue, and it ascends to heaven because she'd redeemed herself in her rejection of Doom's bargain. Now, of course, Mephisto sends the 2 sorcerers back to Earth, and the guy's pissed off to no end, but we end up learning that Doom knew that his mother would never accept his bargain, and that every bit of what happened was planned by Doom so his mother's soul could go to heaven, even at the cost of being disowned by the person he cared for the most. So this story shows us that Doom, despite desiring world domination, can be selfless and sacrificial, adding a great deal of depth to his character. Another landmark story is 2005's Books of Doom by Ed Brubaker, because this served as a retelling of Doom's origin story with a lot more detail. But what really makes it interesting is that this is Doom's own retelling of his origin. And so what that means is that this is the version of his origin that Doom wants the listener to know. And given how proud and unwilling to admit mistakes he is, we have to accept that Doom is somewhat of an unreliable narrator. But this series gives us some real insight into Doom's psyche, and we actually end up seeing how Doom's hubris has distorted his account of his own past. For example, he blames Reed Richards for the accident that scarred his face, when everything else that we've seen indicates that Reed actually tried to warn Doom that his calculations were off, with Doom ignoring that warning. But in this version, Doom cannot admit a mistake, because that would undermine his idea of himself as the smartest person in the world. So he convinced himself that he was just simply not at fault. We also get to see just how much of the trauma of losing his mother had affected the rest of Doom's life. Not only is saving her soul the greatest driving force behind everything he does, but his obsession has alienated him from society by making it impossible to form real emotional bonds with anyone. Doom is capable of romantic feelings, as he was clearly in love with Valeria, but he was willing to sacrifice any sort of meaningful relationship with her in the name of chasing facing his obsession with his mother. Furthermore, Doom begins a relationship with a fellow student in college, but looks into her eyes and realizes she doesn't compare to Valeria or his mother, so he just starts choking her, nearly killing her before he stops himself. So yeah, I mean, Doom is a tragic character that has gone through a lot of trauma, but he's also a bit of a psychopath. But another interesting revelation from Books of Doom is that the iconic armor Doom fashions for himself is actually an attempt to further cut himself off from the rest of the world, as well as stop the dreams that he was having about his mother, because he believes that once he dons the armor, he'll stop feeling pain, fear, basically any real emotion. And so the death of his mother had an incredible effect on him. It literally led him to isolate himself mentally, emotionally, and physically from basically the whole of humanity. But if I had to pick one story that really showed Dr. Doom realizing everything he ever dreamed of course it would have to be Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars 2015. One, because of just how truly naked it shows Doom on a mental and emotional level. And number two, because it's a fantastic story and everybody needs to read it. But there's a reason that Doom is getting introduced into the MCU right now, and it's because the MCU's headed towards Avengers Secret Wars, and that's certainly going to be based on this event. But for those of you guys unfamiliar with it, the whole Marvel multiverse was basically ending due to a series of incursions brought about by a race of cosmic beings known as the Beyonders, and even Dr. Doom and Molecule Man's actions. But basically, universes within the multiverse were crashing into one another, and these incursions led to the destruction of one or both universes. And so, harnessing the reality warping power of Molecule Man, another classic Fantastic Four villain, Dr. Doom, along with Doctor Strange, launches an attack at the Beyonders and then winds up killing them and taking the power for himself by way of Molecule Man, but also eradicating pretty much what was left of the multiverse. And so Dr. Doom, with this newfound power, is able to take fragments of the universes that have not been destroyed, cobble them together in a kind of makeshift universe known as Battleworld, and starts calling himself God Emperor Doom, where he rules Battleworld with an iron fist, cementing in his own mind the fact that survival of the human race is only possible with Doom firmly in control. But this victory is incredibly short-lived, because he's riddled by self-doubt and knows that his subjects only worship him out of fear. They don't worship him because of love. He also can't really help but compare himself to Reed Richards, wondering how his rule would measure up to one with Reed in charge. Now, Reed happens to be one of a handful of people who remember what reality was like before Battleworld, because he survived the collapse of the multiverse and basically a multiversal raft, and that during this final showdown, Doom is forced to admit that Reed would have actually been a better ruler than him. So you have Doom, who's literally saved reality and become a god, broken by the realization that his arch rival had not only bested him, but is also a superior leader. Now, hopefully, of course, we get some kind of similar character-defining moment in the Secret Wars film. But what does all this mean for Dr. Doom in the MCU? Well, one of the major criticisms of the MCU as a whole is a kind of lack of compelling villains. Outside of Loki and Thanos, really, most of the villains featured just kind of seem to be one-dimensional, and they failed to exhibit any sort of real character development. With Doom, that cannot be the case. Dr. Doom is very similar to the most successful MCU villains like Eric Killmonger, Loki, and Thanos, and that they all believe that they're the good guys. Killmonger believed that he had a legitimate claim to the Wakandan throne and that he would lead the Wakandan people to prosperity. Loki believed that he would be a better ruler of Asgard than Odin or Thor. And Thanos believed that in order for the universe to survive, he had to restore balance to it through a snap that erased half of all sentient life. Dr. Doom will believe that he's right. He'll believe that he is saving mankind through his quest for power, and that the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and anybody else that tries to stop him are the real villains. Of course, not to be too cynical here, but the possibility exists that Marvel might actually squander this opportunity. I mean, it would be fair to say that the MCU has been on a kind of cold streak recently, with very few of their films being able to get fans genuinely excited since Avengers Endgame. I mean, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Hopefully we end up getting an appropriately complex version of Doom on screen, and then he becomes one of the MCU's most iconic villains and doesn't really get treated like another villain that exists so the good guys can have someone to defeat. Because if done correctly, when Dr. Doom finally arrives in the MCU, he won't just be another villain. He'll instead challenge the notions of what it means to be a hero. Because as you guys have seen over the course of this video, Dr. Doom consistently reminds us that the line between heroism and villainy is sometimes simply just a matter of perspective. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.